It began with nightmares, not the kind children have about monsters under the bed, but something far more specific, far more terrifying. At 2 years old, James Leininger, a toddler from Louisiana, began to relive another man's death. Night after night, he would wake up screaming, thrashing in his crib, kicking his legs at the ceiling as if trying to escape a burning cockpit. He would shout out words that made no sense for a child of his age. Words like, "Airplane on fire, little man can't get out." His parents, Bruce and Andrea, were first concerned, then confused. They were a modern Christian family with no exposure to or interest in the paranormal. But soon, the details became too precise to ignore. During the day, James would slam his toy planes into the furniture, over and over, identifying a specific point of impact. He began to name things. He talked about his Corsair, the famous gull-winged fighter plane of World War II. He named the aircraft carrier he flew from, the Natoma. He even named a fellow pilot, a friend he called Jack Larson. These were not the fantasies of a child. This was testimony. This was the presentation of evidence from a witness who should not exist. This case doesn't just suggest that consciousness might survive death. It presents the data points. It is a direct challenge to the materialist paradigm, packaged in the nightmares of a 2-year-old boy. To understand the power of this case, you must first understand the witnesses. Bruce and Andrea Leininger were not looking for this. Bruce was a highly rational, detail-oriented human resources executive. His world was one of facts, figures, and verifiable claims. Andrea was a dedicated mother, grounded in the realities of raising a family. Their belief system was firmly rooted in their Christian faith, which, in its modern interpretation, had little room for concepts like reincarnation. They were, in every sense of the word, ordinary people, and that is what makes their testimony so extraordinary. When the nightmares began, their first instinct was rational. They sought logical explanations. Perhaps James had seen a war documentary on television. Perhaps he had overheard conversations. They meticulously retraced every television show watched, every book seen, every conversation had. They found nothing. Bruce Leininger especially was skeptical. He initially believed his son was suffering from a psychological issue, a childhood trauma they couldn't identify. The idea of a past life was not just foreign, it was absurd. He did not want to believe. He was compelled to investigate, driven by a father's need to understand his son's terror. He approached the mystery not as a believer, but as a reluctant detective, determined to debunk the impossible claims coming from his own child. It was this rigorous, skeptical investigation by a man predisposed to disbelief that would ultimately turn an incredible story into a documented case file. He wasn't a mystic, he was a father, armed with a notepad, a telephone, and an unshakable need for the truth. The investigation began to turn from an exercise in psychology to a meticulous historical inquiry. When James named his aircraft carrier as the Natoma, Bruce Leininger, the skeptical father, went to the internet. He was searching for a ship that was famous, a large carrier. But what he found was the Natoma Bay, a small, less renowned escort carrier that operated in the Pacific during World War II. It was an obscure detail a 2-year-old could not possibly have encountered. This discovery was the first crack in the foundation of the Leiningers' reality. The evidence quickly became a dossier of impossible facts. The pilot's identity. James described a crash near Iwo Jima and named his own previous self, James 3. This vague clue led his father to search the records of the Natoma Bay's crew, where he found the name James M. Houston Jr., a pilot killed in action near Iwo Jima. The co-pilot's name, James had named his friend as Jack Larson. Records later confirmed that a pilot named Jack Larson had indeed flown with James Houston Jr. from the Natoma Bay. The final detail, when Bruce Leininger showed James a book with a picture of the ship, James pointed to the plane on the cover and said, "That's where I got shot down, Dad. It was in my engine." Records verified that James Houston Jr.'s plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire, causing the engine to fail before the plane crashed into the sea. Dr. Jim B. Tucker, a psychiatrist and the successor to Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia, later formally investigated the case. He documented at least 54 specific, verifiable details from James's statements that matched the life of James M. Houston Jr. The core revelation was not just the story, but the sheer accuracy of the data. It was the statistical impossibility of a toddler guessing 54 distinct, verifiable points of information about an obscure World War II pilot. The memory was not a hallucination, it was a deposition. But if this testimony is real, if these memories of a violent death are irrefutably accurate, what does that imply about the you who is watching this video now? What elevates the James Leininger case from a compelling anecdote to a cornerstone of consciousness research is the nature of the evidence itself. It wasn't just about names and places, it was about technical knowledge a child could not possess. For instance, James knew his plane was a Corsair. When his mother, Andrea, pointed to a picture of a Corsair and noted the bomb attached underneath, James corrected her instantly, saying, "That's not a bomb, Mummy. That's a drop tank." A drop tank is an external fuel tank used to extend an aircraft's range, a specific piece of military aviation hardware. How could a 2-year-old make such a distinction? This pattern of specific technical recall is a hallmark of the cases studied by Dr. Ian Stevenson and Dr. Jim B. Tucker. They are not vague feelings or impressions, they are statements of fact. Stevenson developed a strict protocol for these investigations, which Tucker later applied to the Leininger case. The protocol requires that any potential source of the information for the child must be exhaustively ruled out. This is known as ruling out cryptomnesia, the phenomenon of forgetting having learned something and later believing it to be an original thought. The Leiningers were the perfect test subjects for this protocol. They had no military books in the house. Their television viewing was monitored. Bruce Leininger even documented his own process, keeping meticulous notes of every new name or detail James mentioned before he attempted to verify it. This created a time-stamped chain of custody for the evidence, proving that the child's statements preceded any possible parental discovery. This methodical approach moves the conversation away from belief and into the realm of data analysis. The question is no longer, do you believe in reincarnation? The question becomes, how do we account for this data set? The 54 points of verified memory are not a story. They are a scientific anomaly that demands an explanation. If the data from the Leininger case is accepted as fact, then the implications are seismic. They force us to confront the most fundamental questions about our own existence. The dominant scientific paradigm, materialism, operates on one core assumption, that consciousness is a product of the brain. It is an epiphenomenon, a ghost in the machine. When the brain dies, the ghost vanishes. All of your memories, your identity, your love, your sense of you, it all dissolves as the neural network shuts down. The Leininger case presents a fatal flaw in this model. If James Leininger holds the accurate, verifiable memories of James Houston Jr., then those memories were not stored in James Houston Jr.'s brain, because that brain turned to dust decades ago. If a personality, complete with its trauma, knowledge, and relationships, can transfer from one physical body to another, then we are not our bodies. The body is not the source of consciousness. It is a receiver, a temporary vehicle. This single idea changes everything. It reframes our understanding of life and death. Death is no longer an endpoint, a cessation of being, but a transition, a change of vehicle. Our lives are not a brief, accidental flicker in a meaningless cosmos, but perhaps a chapter in a much larger story. Imagine your own life not as a single isolated film, but as one episode in a vast, ongoing series. This perspective doesn't diminish the importance of this life, it magnifies it. It suggests that what we learn here, the love we cultivate, the challenges we overcome are not erased. They are carried forward. They become part of the permanent record of the soul. The fear of annihilation, the deep, existential dread that drives so much of human behavior, is suddenly called into question. If what James Leininger experienced is true, then we have nothing to fear from the death of the body, only from a life lived without awareness of our true nature. This implication forces us to draw a clear line between the brain and the mind. For centuries, we have used the words interchangeably, but the evidence from this case, and thousands like it documented by researchers at the University of Virginia, suggests they are two distinct entities. The brain is the physical hardware. The mind, or consciousness, is the software, or perhaps more accurately, the user. The brain is a biological processor, a complex radio receiver. It tunes into a signal that originates elsewhere. During life, that signal, our consciousness, is localized, focused, and filtered through the limitations of our 5 senses and the wetware of our neural pathways. When the receiver is damaged or destroyed at death, the broadcast doesn't stop. The signal continues. This is not a new idea. It is, in fact, one of the oldest ideas in human history, central to the philosophies of Plato in the West and the Vedanta in the East. What is new is the emergence of empirical, verifiable data from the modern world that supports this ancient hypothesis. Dr. Ian Stevenson referred to these cases as data points that challenge the production model of the brain. He argued that if we can find even one case where a personality and its memories have survived the destruction of the brain, the entire materialist model collapses. It's like finding a single black swan. It definitively proves that the statement, "all swans are white," is false. The James Leininger case is that black swan. It suggests that we are not just our personal stories, our jobs, our relationships in this life. We are something more ancient, more enduring. If the mind can exist without the brain, what is the eye that is watching this video right now? Is it the product of your neurons firing, or is it a field of awareness that is temporarily using those neurons to have this experience? Despite the mountain of verifiable data, the case of James Leininger leaves us at the edge of a profound mystery. We have the what, the meticulous documentation of a consciousness transfer, but we are left without the how or the why. This is the limit of our current knowledge. How does a consciousness, complete with its memories and traumas, attach itself to a new developing brain? What is the mechanism of this transfer? The data provides no clear answer. Researchers like Dr. Ian Stevenson and Dr. Jim B. Tucker could only speculate. They noted that a vast majority of these cases, particularly in the West, involve a sudden and traumatic death in the previous life, as with James Houston Jr. It's as if the shock of a life cut short creates an energetic imprint, a psychic wound that seeks resolution in the next incarnation. But this is a correlation, not an explanation. It describes a pattern, but not the underlying law of the cosmos that governs it. Furthermore, why did James Leininger remember? The vast majority of humanity does not have explicit, verifiable memories of past lives. The memories of James began to fade as he grew older, a phenomenon observed in nearly all documented cases. By the time he was a teenager, the vivid nightmares were gone, and the specific details had receded, like a dream upon waking. Is there a veil of forgetting that is part of the human condition? And if so, why was it so thin for this young boy from Louisiana? Was it the trauma, a soul contract, an act of grace? When Bruce Leininger, the father-turned-investigator, was asked these questions, his answers shifted from the certainty of a detective to the humility of a man who has touched the edge of the infinite. He could present the facts, the names, the dates, the verified testimonies, but when it came to the ultimate cause, the transcript of his life's work becomes a long, respectful pause. The evidence proves the phenomenon is real, but it cannot explain the machinery behind it. We are left looking at a map of a territory that our current science has no tools to explore. This veil of forgetting is perhaps the most profound mystery of all. The data from thousands of cases suggests that we come into this life having forgotten where we came from. Philosophers have contemplated this for millennia. Plato, in his Mythover, described souls drinking from the river of unmindfulness, Lethe, before being reborn. This act of drinking induced a forgetting, ensuring that each new life could be lived on its own terms, a fresh start. He suggested this wasn't a flaw in the system, but a feature, a necessary prerequisite for genuine free will and moral development. If we remembered all our past triumphs and failures, would we ever truly learn, or would we simply repeat old patterns, burdened by a history too vast to bear? Ancient Hindu texts, like the Bhagavad Gita, speak of Maya, the illusory nature of the material world. This cosmic illusion is what makes us identify so strongly with our current body, our current personality, our current story. This intense identification is necessary to fully engage with the lessons of this life, but it also creates the veil that obscures our true, eternal identity as Atman, the deathless self. So, cases like James Leininger are not just anomalies, they are glitches in the matrix of forgetting. They are rare moments where the veil is torn, offering us a brief, shocking glimpse of the larger continuity. This raises an even more challenging question. If we have lived before, who were we? What unresolved traumas, what unlearned lessons, what forgotten loves might be silently shaping the contours of our present life, hidden just beneath the surface of our conscious awareness? The case doesn't just ask us to consider James Leininger's past, it forces us to question the true depth of our own. Given the quality of the evidence, the meticulous documentation, and the credibility of the witnesses, one must ask a critical question. Why is the James Leininger case not taught in every university psychology and biology department? The answer lies not in the evidence itself, but in the paradigm that is asked to interpret it. Mainstream science operates within the framework of materialism, the philosophical belief that matter is the fundamental substance in nature, and that all things, including consciousness, are the results of material interactions. This is not a proven fact, it is a foundational assumption, an operating system. Evidence like the Leininger case is not just a curiosity, it is a direct threat to that operating system. It is like a piece of code written in a language the system cannot compute. The typical skeptical responses fall into a few predictable categories. First is fraud. The suggestion that the parents, Bruce and Andrea Leininger, orchestrated an elaborate and pointless hoax over many years. This fails to account for their documented initial skepticism and the sheer emotional toll the experience took on their family. There was no motive, no financial gain, no fame sought. Second is cryptomnesia, the idea that James somehow as a toddler absorbed all 54 points of obscure military history from a television show or book and then forgot the source, reenacting it as a memory. This explanation was exhaustively investigated and debunked by both the parents and Dr. Tucker. No source was ever found. When these explanations fail, the final argument is often a simple dismissal. The evidence is labeled anecdotal, a word used to disqualify data that doesn't fit the expected model, regardless of how well documented it is. But this dismissal reveals more about the limits of the paradigm than the limits of the evidence. It's a textbook case of what philosophers of science call a paradigm shift. When a reigning scientific model is confronted with anomalies it cannot explain, its first reaction is not to question the model, but to ignore the anomalies. The Leininger case persists precisely because it cannot be explained away. It sits there, a well-documented, scientifically investigated fact that patiently waits for a new science, one that is brave enough to build a model that fits the data, rather than trying to force the data to fit an outdated model. Now that you have seen this evidence, you cannot unsee it. The case of James Leininger is more than just a fascinating story. It is a key. It is a piece of data that unlocks a door in the wall of our perceived reality, revealing a landscape far larger and more mysterious than we have been taught to believe. It suggests that we are not fragile biological machines destined for oblivion. We are ancient travelers, bearers of a consciousness that is indestructible and eternal. Our lives are not random accidents, but meaningful chapters in an epic journey of learning and becoming. This knowledge is not meant to be a simple comfort. It is a profound responsibility. If we are more than this one lifetime, then our actions here carry a weight that echoes in eternity. The kindness we show, the wisdom we gain, the love we express, these are not fleeting moments. They are the currency of the soul. If this investigation has expanded your sense of what is possible, leave a like, not for the algorithm, but as a quiet acknowledgement that your mind is open to a grander reality. If this journey resonates with the questions you've been asking, subscribe to continue the great exploration. This concludes our inquiry for now, a synthesis of documented evidence and timeless philosophical questions, grounded in the sources that guide our journey. What truth did you recognize today?